Okay, so we've been talking about some of the teams and what they're going to do with their draft picks, especially now that we have the lottery set. One of the teams we haven't talked much about is the Utah Jazz, team that didn't have the best season last year. They have a pretty high lottery pick. What do you guys think they should do with their pick?
I feel like the Jazz are in a very interesting position just as a team because obviously they're in kind of a rebuild mode, but I still think that they also at times kind of try to compete with some of the older guys that they have. Lauri Markkanen, Jordan Clarkson. But at the same time, I think they know that that's not necessarily the end-all, be-all. But I think the Jazz still need to use this draft pick, and I think that they should just try to go after the best available player so that they can try and get a core going for the future.
Yeah, I mean, looking at their stats from the last year, they had a defensive rating of 120, which was last in the entire association. So they've got to somehow address that. Maybe not necessarily in the draft itself, because at pick 10, there's not a lot of like defensive focused players that I think would significantly improve that. So kind of like you said, just adding the best player. And I personally, looking at the roster, like the players to build around is definitely Keontae George, maybe Lauri Markkanen if you want to throw him in as a potential, like looking into the future, like the crystal ball, the Utah Jazz championship team. I think Lauri Markkanen is good enough to be that second or even third option on the championship team if he can be productive, especially on the three-point line. But I feel like Keontae George is a solid guard to build around in the future. You have Taylor Hendricks last year who didn't explode out of the gate, but he had a decent rookie season. He was, I think, at like 7 points per game, I want to say. 7.3. So nothing crazy. He was 38% from three, so you like that potential to shoot as a 6'9" forward. But outside of that, they've got a lot of these guys that have a similar role, like Jordan Clarkson and Colin Sexton. They're both 6'3", both 190 pounds, and they're both just bucket getters. So I don't know how much of that same thing you could have in a diet offensively. But at the same time, if you try to make a move trading Colin Sexton or Jordan Clarkson, I think you could get some decent value back, whether that's draft capital or players back. And I think maybe if you move on from some of these offensive-minded players and try to bring in maybe one or two more defensive stopper, 3-and-D type players, that could help elevate this team to an above 500 record, because they had 30 wins last year. It's not like this team is god-awful. It's just they need to focus and be a little bit more balanced rather than just purely offensive talent.
I don't know how likely this is. Oh, let me re-say that. I don't know how likely this is, considering that Ron Holland is on the higher side of draft picks, but I feel like I'd really like to see him fall here just because he's a beast in transition, and along with Keontae George, I feel like he would be a good fit. The defense obviously is his best aspect, and there's questions about his shooting, but I feel like he'll be a guy who could be serviceable at the next level. So I think that's why I'm higher on him from a shooting standpoint. But even then, I still feel like he has all the other tools to not only be the best fit at that spot if he were to drop that far, but I think that a lot of what he has can add to what Utah needs, and he's just the best player.
Yeah, I don't know about how I feel about Ron Holland's shooting potential. I think he only shot 25%. Like, his form's not bad, so I think eventually he'll get there. I just think it might take a while, which the Jazz might have. But one of the things looking at their roster, I don't know if they're trying to win now or if they're trying to just kind of compile assets for when they really want to make their push. Because, like, on one hand, you would think it's probably about time to make decisions on whether Clarkson and Sexton are going to be like your long-term guards, because they're coming off pretty solid seasons where Clarkson averaged 17 points, Sexton averaged 18.7. So, like, they had good years, and but their age kind of doesn't match with the rest of your team. Like, in a way it does. You have a couple 26-year-olds like Lauri Markkanen, but you have guys like Keontae George, who's like 20. So it's almost like two separate pathways of you have guys who are like mid-20s, should be about a year or two away from competing at like a high level. And then you have guys who are like Taylor Hendricks, Keontae George, who are like kind of really young, like Walker Kessler, even Darius Bazley, who they picked up for cheap off kind of like sitting at home. He's 23. Like a lot of their rosters either 23 or like 25, 26. So I think you kind of have to, you would think they would eventually pick between which group they're kind of going to go all in with, but maybe they want to just like be like how Toronto was. Like maybe they want to build to the point where Toronto was before they got Kawhi and just kind of be like a middle of the road team, which if that's the case, then I think you have to go best asset here at 10. Like you just kind of want the best player to possibly flip later or hopefully fit into whatever version of the team you want to have at the end of the day. So I think at 10, it's kind of difficult because if they were going to need like the wings that they probably want, like the defensive wings are kind of already gone by then, you would think. But I don't see this as like a bad place for someone like a Tyler Smith or like the other brother from the Thunder I'm thinking
Cody
of.
Williams.
Cody Williams.
That's who I was thinking too, because he could play that 3 for the Jazz because you've got Keontae. If you keep one of Clarkson or Sexton, then you could throw somebody like a Cody Williams in there at the 3, run Lauri at the 4, and then keep Walker Kessler at the 5. That could be a pretty solid, somewhat young starting 5 outside of Sexton, and he's still only 25. Yeah. But Cody Williams didn't have like a great defensive season, and I feel like outside of Walker Kessler, all 4 of those players are all offensive minded. Like we're seeing a lot of success right now from the Timberwolves. You've got Anthony Edwards, who's great defensively. Jalen McDaniels, great defensively. Rudy Gobert, the defensive player of the year. I don't know how a team like the Jazz would be able to match up with a Minnesota Timberwolves team that's got a ton of stoppers.
Well, I'll say at first they wouldn't be able to. Like, just They're not built to really go up against a team like that as currently constructed. But I don't think they're really trying to. Like I said, I think they're kind of want to be one of those like tread water teams until they can convince somebody or trade for someone who's on the market to kind of make them take that next jump. So I think Cody Williams is a good pick because while he didn't have he's not known as like a defensive stopper, he has all the tools to be. Like he has almost like a similar build to like a Jaden McDaniels in a way. Like he's like tall, rangy, but he also has like more advanced ball skills at this age. He can pass it better. And his brother, we see like he has the potential to fill out if you just look at his brother in the league with OKC, like he's night and day compared to where he just was a year ago. So he has potential to fill out, and when you have someone like a Walker Kessler, like backbone in your defense, playing like that Rudy Gobert role, just protecting the rim, I think he kind of lifts he's like the tide that lifts all boats. Like we see Cat being a decent defender for the Timberwolves when throughout his career he's been kind of like a net negative on that end. But because he knows Rudy's back there, it kind of makes his defense look better than it is. So I think Williams could benefit from that with having Kessler back there. And like the only thing I would say maybe against Williams is that they do have a lot of wings. Like you still have a Bazley, you still have a John Collins, you still have a Taylor Hendricks. So it's like, do you want to take another wing into this? And I think another avenue they could possibly go is if they want to punt on a Colin Sexton or trade a Jordan Clarkson while their value's still high after coming off of pretty decent seasons, maybe they go guard here, which I could see a world where maybe it's a little bit wishful thinking for them because he's mocked a lot higher. But I could see a world, especially because most of the teams ahead of them don't need a guard. There's only a few teams that need one. So if a Nikola Topic is there, or possibly like someone like a Reed Shepherd or maybe even Isaiah Collier there, maybe taking a look at guys in that maybe at the guard position to pair along with Keontae George. Because I don't think, while he played some on ball last year, I don't think necessarily that's his natural position.
I think if we do see a run on guards early, but Utah still believes that guard is where they need to go, I think they could be a team that maybe reaches on the potential that we saw in March Madness for Jared McCain, because I think regardless of if they keep Sexton or Clarkson, I think you're still going to want to get a lot of shots to Markkanen and to Keontae, obviously. I feel like Jared McCain is a guy that could come in there and still bring the ball up for you if you want him to, but he doesn't need to be like in the future at his ceiling. I don't think you need Jared McCain to be shooting 20, 25 times in a game. I think that's what you really want to see from Keontae in the future, is be that almost like Donovan Mitchell type player that the Utah Jazz had for a few years, where he could go get you 30 points on a given night. And you could have someone like Jared McCain go out there, play some solid on-ball defense, get 5 or 6 assists on a good night, and just be kind of that calming presence in a backcourt that features more of Keontae's offensive skill set.
Yeah, I would say another person maybe to look at. Like, it's hard because at 10, like, there's so many different players they could go for. But someone else that's interesting to me here would be maybe a Tidjane Saloon. He had a really good game the other day. They upset a team that was 25-0. And, like, in that game, he had, I want to say, around 13 points. I'm not for sure. I can pull that up here in a second. But he had, like, he kind of showcased all of what you would hope he would be at the next level. Like, defense, the ability to put the ball on the floor towards closeouts, the ability to shoot, and, like, some pretty good athleticism and size. So I think he's someone that, like, he has, like, for me, he has less of a concern than someone like a Cody Williams as, like, maybe having too many wings, because he's someone that can, like, do a little bit of everything, and he can really shoot the ball. So there's always room for guys who can shoot. And while Cody Williams posted good numbers, I think his volume was not enough to necessarily bank on him as a shooter at the next level.
I think I would definitely change my mind, though. And I think Cody Williams is a good pick for a lot of reasons. One, I feel like obviously they're not in the win now situation. And Cody Williams at Colorado, he's shown he can be a productive player. But like Cameron mentioned earlier, there's a lot more from him that scouts are expecting and we're expecting to see. And I think that if you can kind of mold him into the player that you want, I think that's kind of beneficial. Not a lot of these other guys, I mean, they're all young, so they do have it, but not to the same extent that a Cody Williams might have. And plus, I feel like with them, they obviously know that they're not going to get a pick who's probably going to change things right away. And with Cody, I feel like you have that benefit of kind of waiting a little bit more on a prospect.
Let's say you're Jazz, 10th pick, you're on the clock. Who's the pick?
Who's been picked?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think if he's there, it is probably Cody Williams, because kind of like what you just mentioned, they're not necessarily win now. I mean, they're not a terrible team. They're able to compete on every given night because of some of the veteran players they have that raise them up a little bit. But adding a Cody Williams who can maybe learn a little bit about playing more on the perimeter from a guy like Lauri Markkanen, or learn how to be a little bit more physical at the rim, as John Collins has been. I mean, he's been one of the most ferocious dunkers we've seen in the NBA of the last few years. He's dunked on your guy Embiid a few times. But I feel like Cody Williams could come in and potentially be at that 10 spot range. There's not a lot of guys that have a huge ceiling, but Cody Williams is one of them.
Yeah, and so Brandon, you said who's picked, so I just ran a tankathon real quick. So we have Riche off the board, Sarr off the board, Klingon off the board, Topic is gone, Buzelis is gone, Castle is gone, Dillingham is gone, Holland is gone, and Reed Shepherd.
Yeah, I feel like if Williams is left, I know Tankathon also has Jacoby Walter there too, but I feel like
that's a little bit of redundancy.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Him and Keontae George, that's almost the same person.
Yeah, although now that I'm seeing,
similar, not the same.
Was Collier on there?
Collier is still available.
I think that could be an interesting fit too, just to mix it up. Just because, like you guys said, Keontae George, he's a little bit taller of a guard, and he could also benefit from not necessarily always having to be the main guy. And I think Collier fits a little bit more of that role. Plus, I think he's got the offensive capabilities to kind of fit with the team. The main thing for him, though, is just shooting, but I don't have a reason to believe that he's not capable of being effective out there. Also, what do you guys think about Dalton Connect ending up there? Because I feel like he's a guy we haven't really talked about in these team previews, and I feel like one of these teams could surely benefit from having him.
Yeah, Dawson Connect, I think he's kind of a really good fit there. It's just the only question I have with Connect is that with the Jazz, it's just what team would take him because he's 23, and it's like it's almost like that 2 timeline thing I was talking about earlier. It's like if you want to win now, I think that's probably the pick if he's still there at 10 because he just showed like elite level like scoring upside. And I think if you put him next to someone like a Keontae George, and then you have the wings on the back end like a Markkanen, and then you have Walker Kessler like holding down the fort from the center position, I think you have good versatility, you have good length, you have good shooting. That lineup can do a lot, just depending on what the last piece you put into it does. But I just don't know if they want to win now. The Jazz seem like they're kind of okay with being in the middle. And, it seems like if you just look at their last couple picks where they took Hendricks and they took Keontae George last year, those are 2 guys who are on the younger side and are, Keontae George was projected to have, a pretty decent immediate impact, but Hendricks is, a guy everyone knew would kind of take a minute. So I think at 10, I think you almost get more value building for that younger core. Mm-hmm. Because I just think eventually they're going to probably flip Markkanen or flip Clarkson or Sexton. Eventually they'll probably flip some of the older guys to get either better older guys or just get more picks. So in a draft class they like. So I think probably this year is probably the last year we see both of these timelines be completely intact. I think by the 2025 draft class, Danny Ainge will either decide I'm going to go for winning now or we're going to start rebuilding really rebuilding right now and trying to be as bad as possible because this class is so good and the next couple classes are supposed to be pretty decent. So I think it's more likely they take someone like a Cody Williams, but both of you guys said that. So I'll try to go somewhere else and I'll say Tita Jane Saloon or possibly someone like a Johnny Furphy is also someone I think would be interesting there. Just someone who can shoot, pretty tall, active rebounder.
Yeah, I could definitely see Utah being one of those teams that at the trade deadline of next year, if some of these guys, if Taylor Hendricks really pops off after one of his first off seasons, and Keontae George becomes a 20-point per game guy in his next year, maybe they're a team that's pushing for playoffs and they don't make a ton of moves, but if it's just not working out, I could definitely see them pretty much blowing up all these young talent, moving Markkanen for picks, moving Clarkson and Sexton for picks. I don't know if they'll also move on from John Collins. That's a lot of overhaul in one trade deadline, but I could see them, you kind of see what I'm saying. If it's not working out, going fully with that young timeline with Hendricks and Kessler and Keontae George and just almost trying to do what the Thunder did where they just collect as many picks as possible, especially with the 2025 class coming next year, and then just hoping they can build it up from there.